Good evening. Welcome to PMQs here on Sky News, where we'll be analysing and reviewing today's Prime Minister's questions in the House of Commons. This week, the fight back as Tony Blair tried to get on the front foot on law and order.
There are two things that we need to do. First of all, we need to introduce the electronic borders, which we've introduced now for some 26 routes. We need to roll that out across the entire country. And secondly, we need identity cards, both for foreign nationals and for British nationals.
In a moment, I'll get verdicts on those performances from my political pundits this week. They are Polly Toynbee and Brendan Carlin. Also, going nuclear, MPs debate energy options. And Ming Watch, how did the Lib Dem leader do at PMQs this time? One of Charles Kennedy's key aides will give her assessment and advice. And you can post your comments on PMQs or any other political stories at my online diary. Go to Adam Bolton weblog at www.sky.com/Sky News and click on the link. First, though, the highlights of today's PMQs in Parliament.
2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister said automatic deportation would apply to any foreign national convicted of an imprisonable offence. Last week, he said it would apply to those actually imprisoned. This week, the Home Secretary said automatic deportation would now only apply to foreign nationals serving a significant jail term. Which is it?
It is exactly as I explained the first time I answered the right honourable gentleman, yes. In the vast bulk of cases, as was explained, there will be an automatic presumption now to deport, and the vast bulk of those people will indeed be deported. And those people, in my view, should be deported, irrespective of any claim that they have that the country to which they're going back may not be safe.
Well, I've got to say, we've gone from all prisoners to all significant prisoners, and now we've got the vast bulk. I think he's just making it up as he goes along. This is an example of a government in complete paralysis. 3 years ago, in January 2003, he announced a review of the operation of the Act. What happened to that review?
Precisely for the reason that we believe that it was important to rebalance the system, that we introduced, for example, the Proceeds of Crime Act that allowed us, to take money off those suspected of being involved in drug dealing. It's precisely for that reason that we introduced the anti-social behaviour legislation, and it's precisely for that reason that we introduced the Criminal Justice Act that allowed us to impose mandatory minimum sentences on people carrying illegal firearms. What those things have in common also, however, is that they were either opposed by the party opposite or they refused to vote for them.
We have been telling the Prime Minister about the problems with the Human Rights Act for years. We've been telling him about the problems. He keeps announcing reviews, but nothing ever happens. I asked him about the Act, not a word about the Act. Let me give him another example of government in paralysis. The head of the Civil Service has said that the Immigration and Nationality Directorate has been performing particularly well. Yet the head of enforcement and removals at that directorate says he hasn't got the faintest idea how many people are in Britain illegally.
There are no official estimates of the number of illegal immigrants into the United Kingdom. By its very nature, illegal immigration is difficult to measure, and any estimates would be highly speculative. Yes, exactly. Michael Howard, thank you. There are two things that we need to do. First of all, we need to introduce the electronic borders, which we've introduced now for some 26 routes. We need to roll that out across the entire country. And secondly, we need identity cards, both for foreign nationals and for British nationals. He asked me a moment or two ago, oh yes, I'm going to go back to this. His spokesman said that there have been 43 criminal justice acts and not one of them has done anything to help. Let me say what is in those acts. Including the Criminal Justice Act that he voted against, the early removal scheme that would allow foreign national prisoners to be deported at the halfway point in their sentence, tougher sentences for murder, sexual and violent sentences. crimes, measures to tackle jury nobbling, allowing hearsay evidence in court, a 5-year minimum custodial sentence for unauthorised possession of firearms, and everything to do with antisocial behaviour. So when we introduce the next load of measures to help deal with this problem, perhaps then he'll support them.
You can sum up the Prime Minister's performance in one word: rattled.
When he was in the Home Office and when the party opposite was in office, crime doubled. So I don't say that we have got everything right. Of course not. We've got to do far more. What I do say is, however, every time the tough measures that he goes out and tells the media are introduced here, they're opposed by him and his party. And so next time we introduce them, perhaps he'll put his vote where his mouth is.
Well, British forces have been withdrawn from Iraq at the time when he leaves office.
The British forces should remain in Iraq until the job is done.
In January, I asked the Prime Minister to consider setting interim targets to make sure that we meet the goal of getting treatment to all sufferers of HIV/AIDS by 2010. At the time, the Prime Minister said it was difficult to do this because other countries need to take action as well. But will the Prime Minister confirm that the government is now supporting the campaign to set interim targets?
Well, David Cameron ending his question time session there with 2 questions about assistance for AIDS in Africa. Joining me to assess all those performances are Polly Toynbee of The Guardian and Brendan Carlin of The Telegraph. Polly Toynbee, how did you see those confrontations?
Well, I don't think Tony Blair couldn't have been on a worse wicket. He really had a rotten hand to play. He had an appalling day the day before where...
So you gave him 3.
I gave him 3.
And David Cameron?
David Cameron, you know, an easy time of it, but did reasonably well. Not brilliantly, because he's reading. You know, he's known for spontaneity, and he didn't seem all that
Now,
spontaneous.
what about Sir Ming? He actually scored some noughts last week. Oh, 2. He'll be relieved with that.
It wasn't great. It wasn't terrific. He really doesn't seem to have found his footing. He seems to be adrift, nervous, anxious. You know, he's a decent, solid, good person who knows a lot about a lot, and somehow he gets stage fright when he gets out there. I'm not surprised, bloody terrifying, but he doesn't seem to be the man for the job.
Brendan, what about you? What were your scores?
I've been a bit more generous. I've given 4 for Cameron and Blair. Not sure whether, in retrospect, I should have done. I think probably I would say Cameron slightly edged it, but then you expect him to, with the nature of the wicket he was batting on, as you say. I thought Blair definitely was fighting back. There was more vim, there was more preparation, there was a bit more fight. Gordon Brown, of course, wasn't there. That may have helped. And as for Ming, I've done 3 for Ming, but then I'm coming under a lot of emotional pressure from the Mingites, not to write him off completely. But I must say, the old those questions about will Guantanamo be closed by the time you go. I mean, it's getting into a sort of general knowledge exercise, isn't it? You know, when what's the world going to be like in a year?
Well, he's trying, I think, to make the point about the Prime Minister's own political mortality.
Yeah, he's also gone for... He's retreated onto safe ground foreign affairs, hasn't he?
Now, what about David Cameron's approach? Because what he did was he touched on these issues and put them in the context of sort of general government competence. He didn't really go in forensically on any one of those statistics. Was that the right way to do it?
I think he could have gone for the jugular much more effectively. I think the government is really, really in deep trouble. They've got rid of their Home Secretary over it, and now it's the Prime Minister is stuck with it, and he can't get rid of it. Well, it's like a large piece of chewing gum on his foot, and the sole of his shoe.
I mean, you've followed these things for a long time. Is it reasonable to say we don't know how many illegal immigrants there are in the country?
Well, of course it is, because by definition, you don't know how many there are because they're illegal and because they came in illegally.
So it's a bit of a bum rap then in that case?
It is. I think Blunkett said something similar to this before in any case, but it is. Back onto Cameron's tactics, I mean, Tory MPs were bemused in the second bit of the clip that you showed that he went on HIV/AIDS when they thought the Labour MPs were
there's going to be a big Africa week here
dreading.
Next week.
Yeah, true, but I also
Gordon
think...
Brown's going to Africa. I mean, he doesn't want to cede that kind
he
of
wants to be
positive territory.
Yeah, but I think that what he didn't do today, obviously last week was a fantastic performance, was he didn't link in. He talked about paralysis, but he didn't hammer home the point about Blair, you're finished, Blair, you're going. That he didn't do today. And it was almost as though either last week or even after Prescott today, nobody's heart was, to an extent, in it.
It struck me, for example, he's a bit more prepared this week. I mean, he knew he was building up to saying the Prime Minister's rattled, and whatever happened, that's what he was going to do.
Well, I think the Prime Minister was rattled, because certainly at the beginning he had a slight crack in his voice. You sensed a rattling around of his words in his throat. And then he found his feet, and then he really delivered a wallop at the end. So I think Tony Blair showed his incredible strength when his back's against the wall.
I mean, another senior minister who was a bit rattled today was the Deputy Prime Minister. He had his own session of questions where he delighted MPs by telling them that he was going to chair a committee on domestic affairs. And then he got the sort of helpful question from the backbenches that with friends like that, who needs enemies?
I would ask him, in his new role, is he still going to have a hands-on in these areas?
Mr. Speaker.
Order. The Deputy Prime Minister.
Sounds like a bit of sixth form public school rail rally.
And the mouth of the humble Brendan practically lost for words there.
He was. I spoke to Dari afterwards. She genuinely didn't mean it. She's got a track record of this, apparently, and she was mortified. But Labour MPs, some of them were absolutely helpless. There was a couple on the front bench just along from Prescott who were really struggling.
Even Jackson. I mean, can he go on like this, or will it still fade away?
I don't think he can go on all that much longer, and I hope for his own sake he finds a way of a dignified retirement, because it's awful to see the man paraded like that. You know, he's made a dreadful mistake. It's all very unseemly, and I think he's just going to go on being humiliated, which is sad.
But do you think he's actually got a role in government? We keep on being told he's chairing all these committees.
Well, he is a very good chair. He is a good peacemaker. There are a lot of extremely contentious, very difficult issues to be thrashed out between departments. In fact, almost every department has, quite serious problems at the heart of it. And so, if he can retain enough respect, he's probably quite good at keeping the peace.
Well, that's the problem. He can't survive regular sessions of this. Obviously, the Tories turned up today with the fully intent to just laugh at everything he said, which they managed to do more or less. But he can't broker deals if he's an object of ridicule.
OK, then, thank you both very much indeed. So this week's aggregate scores out of 10, a score draw. 7 for Tony Blair, 7 for David Cameron, and 5 for Menzies Campbell. So he's doing a lot better there. Let's now get the result of that European football match and go over to Steve Gainsford, who is at Sky Centre. Steve.
Adam, thanks. I wish I had better news for you from Paris, but it finished Barcelona 2, Arsenal 1. Arsenal seemingly just 15 minutes away from victory at the Stade de France, and then it all went wrong. Watching it with me was the former England international, Luther Blissett. Luther, desperately disappointing for Arsenal.
It was indeed, yeah, and having survived the initial when obviously Lehmann was sent off, then you think, right, he can give the goal there. They've got away with that. They've then taken the lead. And to me, I think they've done very well. They've worked so hard, and very disappointed that they lost it in the last 15 minutes.
And Sol Campbell, he's had a torrid year, and it was him that got the goal for us.
It did, yeah, a super goal. I mean, Henry with a fantastic free kick. It came at just the right enough pace on it, and he got away from his marker and put it away just like a striker would. So, very good goal from him.
Was it just the fact then that 10 men couldn't hold on?
Well, I think what it was, they'd always wear you down because they move the ball around, they switch the ball from side to side and always keep you chasing. And in the end, with the slippery pitch and everything, they ran out of steam, Arsenal.
And glimpses from Ronaldinho, but it wasn't really him that turned the tide.
Not really, no. I thought Arsenal patrolled, they marshalled him very well. And the little bits he had here and there, I mean, it caused them one or two little problems. But overall, it was really the unknown players, really, or the lesser-known players that ultimately came through and got them the victory.
And one very well-known player, Henrik Larsson, was very much a part of Sportsline at 10:30. It should have been celebrations tonight. I'm afraid it wasn't. Barcelona win the Champions League final at the Stade de France. Reaction and all the action in Sportsline at 10:30. Adam.
Thanks very much indeed, Steve. Well, back with a vengeance. Those were the Prime Minister's words to describe the option of building a new generation of nuclear power stations. So has he already decided that what the atomic answer is to Britain's energy question? Joining me now is the Energy Minister Malcolm Wicks and his Conservative shadow, Charles Henry. Malcolm Wicks, we're still waiting for your report, but effectively the Prime Minister's preempted it. We're going to have more nuclear power stations, aren't we?
Well, I don't think he has. I mean, he said that nuclear was back on the agenda with a vengeance. The thing you didn't mention, and you should have done to be fair, he said also energy efficiency and renewables are back on the agenda, which does hint, doesn't it, that there can be no one answer to this. On nuclear, we're looking at it very seriously. We're looking at advantages, disadvantages. We'll be reporting to the Prime Minister in the summer.
But of course, the difference is no one really has a problem with renewables or indeed with energy efficiency, but nuclear is highly controversial, and he did seem to be giving that the thumbs up.
It's highly controversial, and of course the media, given a complex subject which is multifaceted, like to pick on one thing to talk about. And I put it to you, Adam, that nuclear, this studio is being lit by electricity. 19% of this electricity is from nuclear. The rest is from other sources. So it'd be a bit daft to do a 19% review. We've got to look at total energy supply and relate it to the big challenge of global warming.
Charles Hendry, are nuclear power stations on the way back?
By the looks of what the Prime Minister said, I think our sense is that from the outset he wanted the answer to be nuclear, and he just had to work out what the question was going to be.
And do you support that decision?
We haven't concluded our own. We're actually doing a thorough review without having decided the conclusions before we start. What we know yesterday is that Downing Street Press Office was spinning what the Prime Minister was saying last night, and that was only about nuclear. It didn't mention renewables, it didn't mention energy efficiency, and so the Prime Minister has scuppered his own review.
So are you saying that when Malcolm Wicks publishes his review, you're not going to take a position because Zach Goldsmith and John Gummer aren't going to publish theirs for another year?
No, we'll be publishing ours about the same time that Malcolm is doing his. Malcolm, I think, has done an extremely thorough job, and it must be very frustrating for him to feel that the goalposts have been moved or set in advance and he can't influence it. That the whole issue about this is that the Prime Minister has said this is the solution, we know that's what he's thinking, but he hasn't answered the question about how it's going to be paid for. Will decommissioning costs be involved? Will there public subsidy? He's actually kicked the ball away from his own team.
Well, look, the goalposts haven't been moved. I rather wish the Arsenal had moving goalposts tonight, and we'd have had a better result for North London. But seriously, I mean, what are the? Let's not.
Well, we have got the Downing Street website, which has produced these charts, which basically says, look, here's the problem: carbon emissions, energy needs. The only way you can fill it is nuclear. That's effectively what that says.
There are two big issues. One is how we get on the right side of global warming, and in other words, how do we reduce carbon emissions? That's a huge challenge.
And the Downing Street website says the answer is nuclear.
Adam, the second big issue is energy supply. We're moving from being a self-sufficient energy island in Britain with the North Sea oil and gas, before that the coal, into a really heavy importer. At the moment, we import just 10% of our gas, but over the next 15 years, when gas becomes more important, it could be 80 or 90% imported from abroad. Now, as they say, discuss. That's quite
we don't have any homegrown uranium, so we'll still be dependent.
Well, we've got some uranium at the moment, and where the uranium mainly will be mined is in Canada and Australia. And as I recall last time I looked, they're pretty friendly powers.
Can you, Charles Hendry, see any other way of dealing with those two questions, which everyone agree are there, energy needs and also the environment, without going nuclear?
What we're looking at is how you fill that need. What we're understanding is that we can do much more through energy efficiency than we're currently doing. We need to be much tougher in terms of new build regulations, so we actually make the best use of the energy we've got. We do the absolute most to make the use of renewables, and then we see how we deal with the rest. Now, we haven't reached the conclusions on that yet, but we are doing this with a clean piece of paper, saying to everybody, you tell us what your strengths are. We'll be asking the difficult questions, but at least we're going to reach our conclusions having done the fact, not before we start.
Finally, though, Malcolm Wicks, can you still say, hand on heart, this government is open-minded whether or not to go for nuclear?
What I can say is that this government is doing a very serious review, not just on the thing, Adam, which you keep asking about nuclear, but how to build up the 100% of energy supply, committed as we are to tackling global warming. We're doing a serious review. The Tories, I understand, can still play around for 18 months. We're in government. We've got to make a judgment. We're going to make a judgment to the Prime Minister this summer.
Well, the Tories saying they're not going to play around for 18 months, but thank you both very much indeed. Well, just 2 months into his leadership, and Sir Menzies Campbell is already facing mutterings from within his own party. Part of the problem seems to stem from his performances at PMQs. Not high scoring on this programme, and in a moment I'll be getting the insider's view from Jackie Rowley, who was Charles Kennedy's press aide. First, though, here's a reminder of Sir Menzies Campbell's first appearance when he was acting leader back in January.
Perhaps you'd like to explain why it is that 1 in 5 schools do not have a permanent head teacher. When the Prime Minister entered number 10 Downing Street,
Mr. Mingus Campbell.
Mr. Speaker, I just knew it was going to be one of those days.
Jackie Rowley, I mean, that really was the nightmare debut, wasn't it?
Absolute agony. I mean, you just feel for the man. And he's a very, very decent man, as your earlier guest was saying. He's a nice person. I think it is a little unfair to go back to that one in that was his first appearance.
We've got some more.
I know you have. But that was his first appearance at PMQs. And just remember, he'd come from the rather more decorous world of the foreign affairs debate where, you know, you weren't in that sort of bear garden.
You would have spotted the oldest leader shouldn't start talking about pensions.
Well, this one, of course, was a slightly different one because this one was where he was actually talking about leadership and whether the party had a leader and all the rest of it. The Commons was also absolutely itching to get its own back on Ming. I mean, just remember, Charles was popular, and in that, they're sentimental in the moment when a leader has been deposed. So it went on and on and on in a way that it shouldn't have. But he didn't let it stay. He didn't find a way to.
I mean, it is very, very difficult. I think probably the most difficult time for any leader is the Liberal Democrat kind of tacked on at the end with two questions.
Absolutely. I mean, it's very, very difficult for them. They've got a number of problems. As you say, first of all, they're tacked on at the end. They only have two questions. The Leader of the Opposition has 6. And we used to get questions from people coming in saying, why didn't Charles Kennedy come back on this? You can't. That's the convention. And also, I mean, the Prime Minister is very, very good, and he always has the last word. So that it's very hard for the Leader of the Liberal Democrats actually get in there. Also, the Leader of the Opposition has already maybe stolen your question. So you've got a lot of issues. The other thing for Ming, I think, which is particularly telling, is you don't have that dispatch box in front of you either. So if you're on a shaky day, if you're really nervous, you can't put your papers down. Everybody can see that your hands are shaking. It's very, very difficult. That's a psychological
and the other thing is you don't necessarily get a very warm reception from the other parties. This is another occasion when Eric Forth rather did for Ming Campbell with a heckle.
Mingus Campbell. The Prime Minister will remember that 6 years ago, the then Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, now the Transport Secretary, told the House that his department should give accurate and complete information about pensions.
Declare your interest.
He went on to say...
I mean, one of the problems, he stands and takes it. He stops.
He didn't let it... I mean, there is a perfectly legitimate problem there. Ming cannot allow himself not to ask questions about pensions, to be intimidated by the House, which is what they were trying to do. He could have come back and said perfectly rightly, well, somebody's got to stand up for pensioners. But he didn't. He stood there and took it, as you say. And in that environment, you're done for. You've only got 63 MPs behind you. You've got 500 against you.
Can it go on like this? Because we've now had Simon Hughes saying he's on probation. We've had the Deputy Leader of the party say he needs coaching on how to perform at PMQs.
Yes, he can learn. It's early days, and you know yourself. I mean, everybody's always looking for a headline. It's unfortunate for him that he's got a bad press on this, but 2 or 3 good goes, and yes, people will say,
now,
well, he was
talk about not
his
having a dispatch box. One of the things he did today was he didn't have notes. If we look at last week, I think we got an idea why.
When will he do something about the National Health Service, about DEFRA, and also about the Home Office?
He's suffering there. I mean, he hasn't even got the little trick of having a clipboard so that nobody can see what's on top. I think the real problem for Ming is he's got to work out what PMQs is actually for. PMQs for the Leader of the Liberal Democrats is not about the answer that the Prime Minister gives, because he very rarely answers and he's an old hand at it. PMQs is about your one opportunity to influence the opinion formers, people like you, the newspaper editors, people who are listening to PMQs. And it's there for you to get your message across in your question. That is the key. Now, today, his questions were so broad. I mean, actually, Tony Blair is not responsible for Guantanamo Bay, as he rather unkindly pointed out to Sir Ming.
It's pretty gentle, though.
It was pretty gentle, because he can see, I mean, you've got to feel humanity for him. But I think once Ming's got on top of that, Ming is an experienced hand. He'll get through this, but he doesn't have a lot of time.
Jackie Ashley, thank you. Jackie Rowley, I'm sorry. Thank you very much indeed. Well, that is all for this week, but we will be back next week with a review of Prime Minister's questions then. Coming up next, news at 10 with that sad news on the football. But today, our pundits had it a score draw between Blair and Cameron, 7-all, and Ming Campbell doing a little bit better, but still in 3rd place.
Nothing is softer for sensitive skin than new Fairy Fabric Softener for a huggably soft wash.
That'll be £2.47. Price applies for the consumption of the first 3 slices only. Each subsequent slice eaten will be 50p extra. Offer only available to new cheese customers.
At Tiscali, we keep things simple. Tiscali broadband is unlimited and £14.99 is all you'll pay every month.
Does not include any other dairy products that are shredded, cubed, sliced or diced. Crackers?
Completely.
For unlimited broadband for just £14.99, call Tiscali now on 0800 107 9000.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are getting ready to land.
Within the miles
Please return to your seat and make sure your carry-on bags
that
are stowed.
lie between us, away with the sea.
Air France.
One fruity.
Ooh. Typhoo real fruit infusions are bursting with tiny ooze.
Ooh.
You only get an ooh with Typhoo.
What is that stuff? It's cholesterol.
Captain, there's something coming from the rear.
Breaking up.
The plant sterols in Flora Proactive help to actively remove cholesterol.
Enjoy the softness of new Fairy Fabric Softener. Nothing is softer for sensitive skin.
Get lost. That's proper travelling. Follow signs you can't read. To places you've never heard of. F's that sound like V's. U's that sound like E's. Who knows where you'll end up? But for the not-so-adventurous, we've written some of the signs in English as well.
Oh, what riches we have inherited from our ancestors down the line. Castles, mansions, stately homes, our link with the ravages of time. Our buildings, monuments and treasures, for your pleasure of viewing is a must. The jewels of the British countryside, preserved by the National Trust.
The National Trust, captured for the first time in high definition. Starts this May on Artsworld. Channel 267.
Coming up in Sky News at 10, we're live in Paris and North London as Arsenal lose out to Barcelona in the Champions League final.
It's all over for the McCartneys. Sir Paul and Heather confirm they're splitting up.
And we'll take a first look at the big stories making tomorrow morning's front pages.
First, though, here's Joe with the weather.
Mist. As seen by Qatar Airways passengers, your 5-star airline.
Hello there. Well, we've seen a fair amount of wet weather through the course of the day, but now that rain is starting to work its way out into the North Sea. By the time we get to dawn, that rain will be mainly over northern parts of Scotland. Elsewhere, an awful lot clearer. Some clear spells, scattering of showers, these mainly out towards the west, certainly to start the day. Top temperatures on the day around 18 degrees Celsius, that's 64 degrees Fahrenheit, most likely over eastern areas. Meanwhile, the showers, some of them going to be heavy and thundery, quite blustery at times, and working their way in from the west, driven in on these very strong winds. Perhaps we'll see some more general rain over parts of Ireland and into western parts of Scotland. Looking further afield, and we've got a rain belt running its way down from Scandinavia, right the way through central areas back to Iberia, where it'll turn showery. Very warm through the south, the Mediterranean. In fact, Spain today had temperatures up to 37 degrees Celsius. That's very warm, 98 degrees Fahrenheit. Out towards the east, high pressure holding on there, so things nice and fine and sunny.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.